Hello, and welcome to this episode of Firearms Friday here at the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne. I have a couple of interesting revolvers to talk about today, and this was a learning experience for me. My name is Evan Green. I'm a volunteer here at the museum, and I have this wonderful opportunity of assisting the staff with updating information in the inventory about the firearms in the museum's permanent collection. So today we're going to look at a couple of Colt conversion revolvers. And this is an area where I learned something I did not know. I assumed that as cartridge revolvers became available, that Colt went back and converted previous percussion revolvers to take fixed cartridges. Well, it turns out that's not true. Colt had a really good business model in that when cartridge revolvers became the thing, they had a lot of parts left over from the percussion revolvers that they had manufactured since the 1840s. So these were actually made as they stand. They were not a conversion of percussion revolvers. They were manufactured from leftover percussion parts and fitted with cylinders that would take cartridges. There's kind of an interesting story behind the transition to cartridge revolvers. Smith & Wesson held the Rollin White patent on bore-through cylinders from 1855 until 1869. And a bored-through cylinder is an absolute essential for the efficient use of a contained cartridge. So when that patent expired in 1869, Colt and Remington and other manufacturers of revolvers were quick to jump on the bandwagon and come out with their own cartridge revolvers. One of the intermediate ones was an 1871-72 Open-Top Revolver. That was the first purpose-built cartridge revolver by Colt. And in 1873, Colt began manufacture of the famous single-action Army that you would all know if you've watched any Western movies or Western TV shows. So this one here, this one is a Richards conversion, and it is readily identifiable by the configuration of the hammer and the fact that the recoil shield at the rear of the cylinder contains the front sight. Almost all of the Colt percussion revolvers, the front sight was merely a notch in the top of the hammer. So this is an improvement over the notch in the hammer sight. And I think about 6,000 of these Richard conversions were made between 1871 and 1878, so contemporary with the availability of cartridge revolvers. This is a Richard Mason conversion, and it's not quite in as good a condition. You'll note that the Richards has the loading or the unloading lever, the ejection lever on the side of the barrel to expel the empty cartridges, whereas that unit is missing from this Richard Mason conversion, as is the front sight. And these revolvers were disassembled and assembled the same way as the equivalent percussion revolver, but did take the fixed cartridge. So, a couple of interesting firearms, and firearms that I learned something about. I assumed there was some sort of linear progression between percussion revolvers loaded with loose powder and a lead ball and cartridge revolvers, but these certainly overlap that transition. I want to take just a minute to put in a word from our sponsor, the Wyoming State Museum. A couple of things. One is that it's frustrating as we do research on these handguns to have, in some cases, practically no information about where these guns came from, who owned them, who used them, what happened. So my recommendation when I'm approached by people who have heirloom firearms is to write down everything you know about those firearms and have it notarized. because oral history tends to degrade over time. And if you have letters, diaries, newspaper clippings that reference your heirlooms, whether they're firearms or something else, it's really important in the long term to document that and keep that information with the heirloom. And it could be furniture, it could be clothes, it could be tools. It will make whoever's doing my job and the museum staff's job 50 years from now much easier. And in that regard, if you have heirlooms of any sort, firearms or otherwise, you might consider donating those to an appropriate museum. In the recent past, I donated some of my father's saddles to the museum in Fort Morgan, Colorado, where I was raised. While you may treasure these items, as I did, at some point one of your descendants is going to say, "Why are we keeping all of Grandpa's old junk? We can take it down to the pawn shop and get enough money to buy an iPhone 26 or whatever is the electronic device of preference at that time." So the cool thing about museums is this stuff is preserved forever. It will always be there, available for research with its attached history. So again, if you've got heirlooms, think about that as a possibility. Thank you for watching. If you've got any comments about my comments or about these revolvers, or any questions that you might have about the museum's collection or policies, please record that in the comments section below, or come by the museum and chat with us. We're always glad to answer your questions and talk to you in person. Thanks for watching.